Everyone, welcome to Podcast Mark. I'm Mark Grasse, and today we have a very special guest, one of my old clients from back in my agency days, Dr. Dave Cohodes, and he developed a program. I'll let you describe it, but basically a program to elevate men and professional men, successful men. And what a lot of people don't understand is that there's essentially an epidemic of suicide in middle-aged men in America specifically, which I'd like to address. And I'm so happy you're doing that. So welcome, Dave.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here with you, man.
Well, I think you were kind of ahead of your time because that was what, 2019, 2018?
Yeah, when you and I were chatting, it was 2019. At that point, I had already gone through, a pretty big metamorphosis. And even before then, what got me into this, I guess this line of work, I started in my career as a somatic healer, as a chiropractor, and I was working a lot of mechanical things with individuals. And then I personally went through a dark night of my soul. I, had gone through a business failure because I had, I don't want to go into too much of the detail, but basically I went into business with a human business partnership, and then that quickly turned south, and sort of left there to come home to my wife and be like, listen, like we kind of lost everything overnight. This other individual, did not live up to their expectations, and so I didn't know what to do. I was completely lost. I felt incredibly emasculated, and during that time, one of the things that was really poignant for me was when I came home and said, I lost everything. She was pregnant at the time. She was 12 weeks pregnant. At that point, it's a viable pregnancy generally. Within the next week, she started to see spotting, and we ended up losing the heartbeat on that pregnancy, and it was a miscarriage. And for me, and this is kind of an interesting, thing, kind of looking back, I both knew consciously that it wasn't my fault, but also in a way I felt it was my fault because I created this financial instability, for my wife. And so she'll say, to this day, it wasn't my fault, but it's still like lived in me that was my, that was my doing. And as I was, working through my own inner dialogue and my own inner workings, and really going through a deep, dark place, one of the things that I noticed is that men in general don't support other men in their emotions. And that's kind of what you were describing, which is, this epidemic of male suicide. And it's not even just male suicide either. It's also substance abuse. And it doesn't even have to get to the point of death with relation to substance abuse. It could just be substance abuse or any type of abuse, whether it's, porn, gambling, food, television, you name it. It's a way for us to cope as humans with our own internal workings, because we aren't given the playbook, if you will, to master our own mindset, our own emotional state, etc. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was, for me personally, was heal. And then I wanted to be able to then in turn give back to other men, because I saw that men need men. I'm just going to say it in that term. We need other men to hold space for us to feel seen, supported, so that there is a sense of belonging. And there isn't a place dark enough that I can't hold space for. And what I mean by that, it's like I've been to the depth of my soul, and I've like seen like the pain and the hurt, and I've lived it, and I've experienced it viscerally, and came back on the other side. And it just strengthens me. It feels like, it's like a workout, like, you do this deep existential workout, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, that's what I was put on this earth to do. It's so telling too, because I recently posted a video on Instagram that went totally viral. It went absolutely bananas. At this point, it's been about a week out there, and it's got 1.4 million views. But it's this moment of me facilitating a breakthrough for a man where he had all of these kind of misconceptions of himself. He was telling himself he couldn't succeed. He couldn't do what he wanted to do because he had ADD. He had a speech impediment. He was always forgetful, all these things. And really what he was doing was he was just kind of like suppressing his own sense of assertion, his own power. I call it your power.
Mm.
And during this video, my job as a facilitator is to escalate the energy. And when I say the energy, it's like the emotion. And when you're feeling depressed or shameful or guilty, it's just below anger and aggression. And so I actually had to bring him up through anger. I actually had to bring him through that kind of feeling of like him getting angry enough to push through that. And as I'm facilitating this, I'm yelling and yelling, and it's like very, very loud, right, on the video. So like when you're scrolling through Instagram and you're like, whoa, what the heck is this? And at the end of that, and this is a very natural process for most men, when they finally tap through and they see their own fear being played out, in this case, his aggression, he was afraid of his own aggression, which is a part of our dark side, if you will, our shadow part of our psyche. There's the natural grieving process. And in the grief, there's sadness. And that's a natural form of release, a psychological release and a somatic release of the body. So he's crying, and I hold him as I would my own child, because in that moment, he needs to know that he is seen, he's safe, and that he is free to be who just he is at that moment, right? With no one else around it. Because that is the healing process, right? It's the belonging. And we'll talk about, kind of going back to men needing men. Well, in that moment, I create belonging for him, meaning that I see him, support him, and I hold him in that context. And when I posted that online and it's gone viral, right, it has shown up for a lot of people that they feel very uncomfortable with. And
Mm.
so a lot of the internet trolls have come out and they are really like hating on this
Oh,
video.
yeah.
Now, there are definitely people that see it for what it is. And they're like, wow, this is beautiful. This is powerful. This is incredible. Great facilitation. And then there are, on the other hand, there's also people that are unable to even sit with their own emotions enough to witness this, which in the grand scheme of things is the reason why we see so much male or masculine suppression of their own emotions, thus creating more suppression, repression. And then in this case, what happens is there's unhealthy expression. And unhealthy expression is, that's coping, that's, spouting out on the comment section, that's, telling somebody else that they're bad for what they're doing or whatever it might be. And so the epidemic is kind of it's like this nuance between what is the social norm for men,
Mhm.
right? Like that we must keep it, tough
So
and all these
stern,
things,
stern
be
guy.
stern, right? Be stoic, right? Like hold back, be a warrior.
Yeah.
And on the other side is for because of that, on the shadow side of it, there is no space for men to express themselves emotionally and for them to be seen. And it's evident in that video, and just reading through the comments, it's evident that that is part of the psyche of human consciousness, at least in the West. And some of the comments are coming through. Here's the thing, I get it, right? It's like it's crazy. It's like it's wild to see, it's like, holy shit, what the fuck was that? Like
Oh,
that's
well, the
wild.
crazy
And
part is that stuff doesn't happen more often, and that's really
right,
what we should be questioning. Is it's like, why aren't more people having these breakthroughs where and it's because what you said. I mean, you said so much there, and so much good stuff about
let's
how it is
forever.
to be a man these days,
Yeah.
and up until now, I mean, even for me personally, like I had a breakthrough about a year and a half ago, and I was able to accept who I was and even the negative parts, and through things like Carl Jung's, shadow work and
Yep.
so a bunch of therapy and a million different things, you start to realize that we've all been kind of brainwashed into this ideal man
Yeah.
where it's just
Like this
like, okay, here's
box.
the box. And
Yeah.
I saw a TikTok video, and I actually just talked about this morning, is that the ideal man is like a John Wick, where it's like a stoic, yeah, he's
Right.
full of rage and violence and all these things, but he keeps it controlled until he gets to release it against his enemies. And now
Right.
he's a vindicated man, but he's still quiet and he keeps his freaking mouth shut. And you're
Yeah.
like,
Don't kill his dog. Yeah.
don't kill his dog. That's what people got from that. I'm like, no, man,
Yeah.
that guy is so broken in so many
Yeah.
different ways. And
Yeah.
him killing everybody doesn't actually do anything to develop
Yeah.
him personally. And
Yeah.
that's not how anybody is. That's a robot. And
Yeah.
men are not robots. And we
Yes.
all tell ourselves this, but then we've actually all been kind of indoctrinated into this, like, here's how a man is. And it's not just from like mainstream media either, because I actually saw this one marriage organization, and the entire message was like, your wife shouldn't know about your struggles, and you shouldn't show her weakness, and you shouldn't blah blah blah. I'm like, that sounds so destructive and disconnected. And why would you tell anybody that?
It's wild, and what women really genuinely want is an emotionally available man. Like they want a man to be open and for him to feel love and for him to be more empathetic in these things. And and I will, it's like this interesting dichotomy because in one sense we need to be strong and stable and it's like present, steadfast, providers, protectors, these things. And on the other side, we also have to be open and emotionally available and adaptable and all of these things. And so like that's a fine line to play. And I see, especially in the men's community, there is like sort of, I won't call them the effeminate leaders, but that's kind of what they are. It's like they're hyper in their feminine, and that's okay because men do need to kind of go in that direction. But on the other side of it, we also have the sort of the hyper stoic men that are, like I think about like a David Goggins, like stop being a bitch, carry the boats, do more, right? And what's really funny between the two poles, and I land very, very much in the center of the two poles because I think you got to have be able to both. It's like being a full spectrum man. And what I've been called, like by the trolls out there, is like one side will look at me as like being hyper soft and like, oh, you're just gay, and then on the other side it's like, oh, you're toxic, carry the boats, it's like what is it,
Well, does it
what.
have to be either? Like,
Right,
could it
exactly.
be
It's like it's
literally anything we want?
absolutely, it's like this nuance, between both sides and the ability to morph in and out. And I think the main thing, going back to your original point, is men need belonging. And I think what we crave deeply is that sense of belonging. And and what that means is like, oh, are we seen? Are we supported in who we are in our humanity? And in a sense, like, when you were saying like, oh, don't go to your wife with all your troubles, is like, I would agree, don't use your wife as your psychotherapist, like she doesn't want to take your shit, like, but you got to deal with, like, you got to do something with it. Like, don't hold it back. So you got to be able to work the energy through you, whether you do it with yourself under a tree in a park, or you go to a men's group, or you express yourself in a healthy way. So that gives you just a little bit more emotional range. And me personally, and there's a lot of different like modalities for this too. There's not just one. Like, I have a way that I walk my guys through, but like it's not that like it's the end all be all. I just know that it works because it worked for me. That was the thing. That's why I facilitate the way I facilitate, because I had a life-changing experience in like 21, and it was like mind-bending. I was like, holy shit, I didn't know this was possible. Like I was like in a whole nother level. Like I had this whole awakening moment, and then it was like, all right, go back, go live your life. And you're like, what? Like, holy shit. Like
Everything's different.
everything's different.
I
It
was
was, man.
wrong about everything. And that's,
Absolutely.
that's what happened to me too. I call it my Kundalini awakening because I was going
Yeah.
through, the yoga and the breath work and all
Yep.
these different things. And then but it came off of failure because at the time I had, I'm not going to go into details about it, but I had like a massive failure and it basically broke my ego and what I thought I was capable of at that time.
Yeah.
And losing that actually was like freedom, because it was like, man, I didn't realize that I had restricted myself into this box and that all it took
Yeah.
was one failure for that box to just be destroyed. And then
Yeah.
when I accepted that and I accepted the failure and everything that led to it, then I was like, oh, I understand this and I'm free from the suffering that I was causing myself about
Yes.
this.
Yes.
But
Absolutely.
that's
Like
so
100%.
hard.
It's so freaking hard. Like that's the gig, right? Like the only work, right, is do what you just did, which is like fail, fall on your face, and accept the fact that you failed. And you call yourself a failure, right? Like it's not that you are a failure, but that you perceive yourself as this and acknowledge that like this exists within you. And it's like almost like full arms out, like I surrender,
That's
right? Like
it.
and feel it, like fully surrender. And the more you surrender into that feeling, then your body goes through this natural psychological reset. And sometimes it comes out in the form of screaming, it comes out in the form of crying, it comes out in the form of shaking. Maybe you just want to pound some pillows and just be like, ah, and then it's gone. And then you're done. And then it's like,
Oh yeah.
oh, that was it. That
No,
like that was
I got the hour of crying. That's what I
yeah.
had. But you know what's
Perfect.
funny is
Yes.
a lot of people hear crying, and I'm like, man, that was so the opposite of sorrow, because what it actually was gratitude, and that's what I
Yes.
felt. It was
Yes.
like, oh my gosh, like everything went wrong, and I'm okay, and I'm
Yeah.
totally fine, and actually
Yeah.
I'm better than I was
Yeah.
before. So it's
Yeah.
like it's part of the process. But I think
Absolutely.
going back to what we've been taught is that failure is wrong. It shows a weakness on your part.
Yeah.
It shows your inability to handle X, Y, and Z, and
Yeah.
it's just wrong. You know,
Right.
because you have to fail. Like you literally,
Yeah.
if you want success,
Yeah.
you have
You
to fail.
Yeah. And you have to acknowledge the fact that you feel like a failure
Yeah.
and like that you have been told yourself like the entire time of your existence that you have to do things in a certain way. And then you get to that edge of that box and you get to that point you're like you go through the process. And I call it the safe formula,
Mm.
which is exactly what you just described it perfectly. But that's literally it. Like which is you have to see it, right? You have to physically like see that like there's some like oh fuck I failed.
Yeah.
Fuck, right? Like you got to witness it and then you got to accept it like and not just like accept like oh I accept no like you need to like
Yeah.
in
Own
your
it.
heart, right? Like you need to admit, accept, fully, compassionately acknowledge, right? Like that's the A. And then the F is feel. Like you got to feel like the fullness of whatever that is. It could be grief, could be pain, could be whatever you're experiencing in the sense, maybe it's like the sense that I'm emasculated, I'm, whatever,
Embarrassed.
like
Yeah.
embarrassed, all of it, right? It's like, it's so full spectrum in that moment. And then when you fully surrender into that, then the expression and then the body, like the soma, which is Greek for body, the soma can literally reset itself. And it will if you continue to allow it to happen and you don't hold back. And that's the thing, like for most men, they are terrified of being witnessed in their own emotions. They're
Mm.
terrified of being seen as weak because in those moments of complete emotional expression, they are weak. Like
Yeah.
they are. And that's part of the gig. Like in order to be strong, you got to be weak. In order to be powerful, you have to be powerless.
Mm.
And so you've got to be able to allow yourself to express. And again, I always say it's like again, it comes out in the form of crying, laughing. It might shake. You might literally shake uncontrollably, and you don't know why you're shaking. Your body's literally just going through a reset. And this is a trauma response. This is a totally normal experience that when we allow ourselves to do that, especially in a guided format,
Oh yeah.
you have a life-changing moment, right? That is a massive breakthrough. And you described it as a breakthrough, and you did. And that is absolutely exactly like everything you just described is exactly what it is, right? Like so I applaud you, sir.
Well, it took so much work. I mean, because I talk about
Yeah.
my transformation, and it was like a 3 or 4 year process of like acknowledging problems and then
Yeah.
trying to find solutions and really not holding back. Because honestly, when I was in fitness, it was all just about training and performance. It was like, hey, my magazine was really geared towards occupational fitness, is what I called it, where it's like
Yeah.
firefighters, soldiers, police officers, like people who actually construction workers, like people who have to use their bodies for their professions. And so
Yeah.
I said, like, you know what, you could train through anything. And if you have the right training and the right physical attributes, then there's no problem you can't handle. And now
Yeah.
I had to accept it like, oh my gosh, that's like a fraction
Yeah.
of what you actually need to progress. And
Yeah.
it does get you there though, because I always found it weird in fitness how many enlightened people you found, and you would just be like, yeah, I mean, this is terrible, but at the time I was like, well, they're kind of dumb. Like they figured it out because they're simple people, and that's how they figured it out. But now what I realize is that all of the training, when you talk about breath work with powerlifting, and
Yeah.
you're actually describing what most people acknowledge as spiritual practices, but you're
Yeah.
doing it for performance, but you're still
Yeah.
getting a lot of the same effects. And
Yeah.
so, but yeah, I mean, the ultimate thing is that I had to break everything that
Yeah.
I thought was me and then discover like, nope, this is you. And a lot of it was accepting the weaknesses and the
Yes.
bad feelings, instead of just
Yeah.
acknowledging that feelings are just not good or bad. They're
They are.
built in,
Yeah.
they're part of it.
Absolutely.
And you can't have one side without the other side. So
Correct.
you denying that they exist is actually just you denying progress to yourself.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
with all that said, systematically, how
Yeah.
do you walk people through the process of getting to the point where they can actually make a breakthrough?
Yeah, and really like when it comes to facilitation, everything you just described is dead on, right? Like you have to be willing to go into the break, right? Like you have to be broken to be unbreakable. And I call my program the unbreakable man, right? Which is sort of a hyperbole and also just it kind of creates the formula in the title itself, which is simply like the process of going through transformation. We kind of already described what that sort of like looks like and how I facilitate somebody like through the SAFE formula.
Mm.
But in order to get somebody there, I go through 3 steps. And these 3 steps are ubiquitous, whether male, female, rich, poor, it literally doesn't matter. These 3 steps are required for anybody to go through the process of, we'll call it transformation, self-mastery, initiation. There's a lot of different terms there. And the 3 steps are simply this: it's clarity, it's command, and I'll unpack these. Number 2 is command, and number 3 is confrontation.
Mm.
So the process of clarity is required for us to go from point A to point B, right? Like most people will tell you, I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to do this. I don't want my wife to bitch at me. I don't want to, but tell me what you actually want,
Mm.
right? Like, which is very difficult. It's like really hard to identify what you truly want in life and saying like, oh, I actually want this kind of relationship. I want this kind of sex. I want this kind of money. I want this kind of profession. I want this kind of depth and fulfillment in my life, because we don't feel naturally deserving as humans. Like we feel like we're so imperfect that we are not deserving of all that is. And so it's hard for us to really like on paper, like dial that in. So I walk guys through the first process of the clarity formula.
Mm.
And I help them just literally identify what they're doing. And then that comes in many, many forms. And the cool thing with that is like you can be pretty general, right? You can look at life in a whole, or you can get really myopic, right? You can get very specific, like, well, talk to me about your marketing plan and you're a marketing guy. It's like, okay, what about your marketing plan? We can get very, very specific as to what would be the most fulfilling for you. Because at the end of the day, what we're all trying to do is create a sense of inner peace and inner fulfillment. And if we want to create health, like, because I'm a health guy, right? I come from a health background. If I want to create health, if you're stressed that you're not getting the results that you want in your life, and you're creating more cortisol in your system, and that creates more inflammation, and then that creates more heart disease and these things, like, are you healthy? Like, so now we got to look at the entirety of life. That was a whole existential moment of my own existence when I realized that when I couldn't separate the man from the man's health, right? I couldn't separate his life, his relationship, his finances. I'm like, it's all the same. It's all one. Holy shit, And then that's when I got into this work, right? So in clarity, you must be able to identify, okay, well, what's on the other side of the valley, right? So you're sitting on like maybe a mountain peak, and you see on the other side, you're like, oh, well, that kind of house and that kind of car and that kind of, whatever, all this stuff. Then you must create command, and command is, well, what actions are you going to take? So there's 3 things that you are in charge of, right? All humans are in charge of just 3 things, and this is your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. You can't control anything else. You can control nothing else. You can't control what your government does. You can't control what other people do. You can't control what's going to happen in the stock market. You can only control and command. I say the word command because that word resonated with me.
Yeah.
Your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. And so within that, there comes the activities that are necessary to command your thoughts, right? And so that's where, like, okay, we need to be able to meditate. We need to be able to know what mindsets are. We need to be able to see things and create affirmations and know how to observe ourselves and our own thought patterns. If you're not getting results in your business, well, let's look at that. How are you thinking about it? What are your belief systems? What do you feel about these things? Because when it comes down to getting a result, we all know that it comes down to taking action, right? Like we know that action equals result. Well, I should say
Hmm.
consistent action over time equals a result.
There you go.
And that's the most
Only thing that
fundamental way,
matters.
right? Yeah, right. Just do consistent things over time and you'll get the result. And you are essentially becoming a disciple. That's what discipline is. You are a disciple of your own manifestation. You're a disciple of your own vision, your desire, right? This is like of the Father. So that's what discipline, right? You're disciplined in taking, I'm going to show up every day. I'm going to do these types of sales calls. I'm going to do this type of marketing. I'm going to do this or whatever workout. Maybe I'm going to tell my wife that she looks beautiful every single day because I'm a disciple of my own marriage and my own vision of this, right? As you are progressing on the path of getting to the result that you want, the old version of self, meaning your psyche, your ego, your shadow self, will come online in sort of in the background, and it'll say, you don't deserve that, or who are you to be so special, or like you're not worthy, or you're inadequate, or you're not lovable. And it'll just come online. And this is the part of ourself that we are psychologically separate, where we are psychologically separate. And this is like the classic hero's journey where Luke Skywalker, Frodo Baggins, you name it, right? Like all of these heroes that go off, the reluctant hero goes off on the journey to go find himself, but he has to face the ultimate shadow. And it could be the shadow form, could be Darth Vader as an example, could be, all the wars that Frodo Baggins had to face, right? It's like, or like really the ring of power.
Mm-hmm.
It's facing that part of ourself. Now, in your context, you said, I felt like a fucking failure, like, oh, and then you like literally in that moment, you are facing your inner demon, which is you thinking that you're a failure, believing that you're a failure, which is an old belief system. But you had to go on the journey of creating success in order to be that which you thought was failure so that you could actually acknowledge it and be with it, which is the confrontation. I'm into the confrontation part now,
Mm-hmm.
which you are confronting the inner shadow self, which means you are literally standing in front of yourself, the most vile, unworthy, like ugly part of yourself, and you're sitting with it and you're like, oh shit, I'm gonna see this. I'm gonna see this. I'm not running from you anymore. I'm not running from you. And you go through it and you move forward and you move forward and you keep moving forward as fearful as you are in your own whatever. It could be your assertion, your aggression, it could be your weakness, could be your unlovability, could be your unworthiness. And you keep moving forward, and you keep moving forward. And the way personally I facilitate, I do a lot of somatic work, meaning I do physical body work. So I'll actually have guys physically move. I'll have guys physically use their body. We'll do somatic breath work as an example. We can talk about that for forever too. But I'll actually have guys physically do actions and activities while they're at the edge of their confrontation, meaning that they're at the edge of this ordeal, right? It's the part of the hero's journey where they're like, I got to face my inner demon. And it's that part of them that they're so afraid of accepting and acknowledge. And when it comes out, that's when you go through, and that's where I use what I call the safe formula.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason we run from that is because we're terrified of that part of ourselves psychologically. And so what you described for your own personal breakthrough is exactly what that is. And I think that was a perfect example of what that can look like. So you confronted it for yourself. Now, here's the cool thing, right? Like that process I just described, which is clarity, command, confrontation, is ongoing. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's life, right? Like oh, I got, like you get this gig at this cool job that you got, and then it's like, okay, you're literally on the same, it's like a sine wave, right? You're going through life and you're going up and down and up and down and up and down, and it's all there to help you reclaim parts of yourself so that the parts of you that you thought were separate, meaning your unlovability, the fact that you're not lovable or worthy or acceptable or all this, right? It's like it's so true for so many people. And this is all, by the way, this is also why it's very hard to hold space for another if you haven't done some inner work, because you see somebody else going through their process and it illuminates in you
Oh,
what you are terrified of.
yeah.
And that's why I'm getting a lot of
Yeah,
kickback on.
the trolls, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Oh
it's
man.
but it's illuminating, right? It's illuminating in them where they're inadequate, where they're not seen, where they feel mediocre or marginalized by society. And so that's where, it's important to have this set up in a constructive way where we'll call it in a safe container. And so whether it's in a room with men or it's on a weekend experience or it's, you go down to the jungle in Peru and go through your initiation with some tribe, yeah,
Drunk.
right. Yeah, exactly.
Man,
And
wow. Yeah, there's so much to unpack there, but I
Yeah.
love that you talked about the wave, because when I first had that, I achieved enlightenment, or what I thought was enlightenment, and I
Yeah.
was just like, man, the whole world's open and the whole world's good, and
Yeah.
I figured it out, and
I
then
figured, yeah, you're like, I'm here. I've
I did it.
arrived.
This is what everybody wants to do, and I did it. I'm done. And then a few months went by, and I'm like, oh, damn it.
Oh,
That's like level one. I was at
oh,
level one, and now I got to do
yes.
this again. And
Yes.
but the more you do it, the more you realize like what a privilege, and what a
Yeah.
awesome thing to be on this journey, where the journey's not done. You don't figure it out. Like,
Right.
the thing is the journey. Like
Yes.
that's life, is doing
Yes.
this process. And the more you could do it and the faster you could do it, the more you're going to advance.
Exactly, like literally what you just described. And that's it. Like, so being what I call being unbreakable doesn't mean that you're going to get to this like existential moment of like, I've
Oh
arrived, right?
God.
I'm
Yeah.
now unbreakable, right? No, it's like you actually know how to go on the journey so that each iteration, each touch point is a little bit faster, a little bit easier. And I won't say it's actually easier, it's
No,
simpler
it's
because
sometimes it's harder.
it's like sometimes it's harder. You're like, oh, this one's
So
heavy.
like, I
Oh
thought I
man.
had that one, and then you gotta,
Right? Exactly. And so because for me personally, I, went through my dark night, and I've gone through many
Oh,
versions of that, right?
I
In
love you
just
said the
different
dark night of the
contexts.
soul too, because a lot of
Yeah.
people don't even understand that concept.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
well, and for me, like another big advancement was just acknowledging that, like, sometimes you're gonna feel bad and negative and all these things that you don't want to feel, but all
Yeah.
it's doing is telling you the new work that you got to do, and the new
Exactly.
thing you got to figure out.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely. And that's what life is, man.
it's
It's like
constant. It doesn't
yeah,
end.
absolutely. It'll keep showing you where you're not free. And so the path to inner freedom, and we'll call it enlightenment, is just acknowledging the fact that, yeah, like I want a nice house and a nice car and this and this. And so it's like, okay, well, that's where I'm going to go. I know what I can command, my thoughts, feelings, and actions. I'm going to do these types of things. And then I'm going to bump up next to all the mindsets and all the, the inner things that I feel are problems. And then I'm going to confront that. And then I'm going to come back into wholeness, and that's
Yep.
the gig, right? And then if those results come, then awesome. If not, then it's like, well, did I actually want that Ferrari, or did I just want inner wholeness? It's like, oh, I actually wanted inner wholeness.
Or maybe you
Oh,
wanted
right,
attention because as a child you
right,
weren't given enough attention, and you like
exactly,
driving fast cars because
absolutely,
people look at me. Uh,
absolutely,
but
yeah,
what you actually developed a superpower with trolls, like,
yeah,
because the funniest thing is when you start to kind of see people for who they are, not what they're
yeah,
portraying, then
yeah,
you're able to dissect it and be like, oh, that poor guy, like, he
yeah,
thinks that being a man is driving a big truck and
yeah,
shooting guns, and
yeah,
you're like, that's pretty sad, and I hope he
yeah.
finds himself somewhere. But the breakthrough I had last week, which I'll send you this episode, is with Justin Breen, and he literally calls me out like 10 times. He's just like, no, stop feeling bad about that. Stop shaking your head that this is the truth, because this is the truth. And the sooner you get to that fact, the sooner you can move forward. And I was like, I was having a really rough day.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah,
oh my gosh, you basically dissected me on my own podcast. And
yeah,
it was like the best therapy session I've had. And it was incredible. But the breakthrough was really that I was trying to fix people that were unfixable and didn't want to be fixed, and that wasn't my
yeah,
job.
yeah,
And the sooner I realized that, the sooner I could move forward and actually just help people who want it. And that's
absolutely,
my job. And
a
so,
hundred percent.
oh man, that was a huge breakthrough. And it's
It's huge. And what you said the guy's name was Justin?
Justin Breen, he's the owner
Justin.
of Brepic Network. So,
Okay.
and he breaks
And
down his vision and his purpose into just two statements. And he's
I
like,
love it.
if it doesn't serve these two statements, then I just don't care and I don't do it. And I'm
I love
like,
it.
how
Yeah.
do you do that?
I, I love that. And what he provided for you was that masculine containment, right? He said, nope. And it's like almost like guardrails, and you're like, I
You're
want to
like,
get
but
out of
what
here.
if?
I
And
want
it's
to
like,
get it.
no.
Yep, exactly. And then he created in that moment confrontation. Now, this is why this is why men need men. And like I will fight tooth and nail until I die on this. Because when there is masculine containment, right? There is like I can't move. And you keep confronting with compassion. This is really important because you can confront somebody and be a dick about it. But when you confront somebody with compassion because you see their greatness, you see where they're holding themselves back, that individual will actually have gone through their own process. And like you were describing, it was like one of the best therapy sessions I've ever had on my own podcast, which is exactly that, where you got confronted and it's like, oh yeah,
That's what I'm
I needed to
doing.
see that. And so men need to hold each other accountable in that sense. And so and you ask the question is like, well, how do I walk somebody through that process? It's literally everything we just described, which is, well, what do you want, right? What's the clarity? And I have very specific formulas for each one of these. And then we create command, and I walk them through processes to create mindset, emotional command. I get them out of their comfort zone, and then we confront them. And when you confront somebody, and here's the thing: is like the training will always do the work for me. Like meaning, like I don't even have to really do much. I just have to set the guide rails. So as an example, this particular guy right before that whole like thing went down, it was like right in the kind of the front driveway.
Mm.
He forgot his pen. And I have very specific standards for each. I call them evolutions. I say, you got to be here at this time with this gear, right? And if you're not, then there's always consequence. And we kind of talk about that and all these things. And he showed up with no pen. And so he failed to meet the standard. Like, okay, you didn't have a pen,
Very
but
simple.
there are no accidents, right? There are no accidents. He needed to know that, like, he needed to fail so that that moment could happen, so that he could have that breakthrough, and that the rest of the world would see it. And even the internet trolls would be like, oh, like, but again, that's their projection because I understand
Yes.
projection. I understand how that shows up. For me, it was a bit of like, it was like funny because it was like a scratch on my arm. It didn't affect the integrity of the being, but it was just like, oh, that's annoying.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Well, no, it was a trigger. And that's kind of
yeah,
where I made a lot of breakthroughs was just acknowledging triggers where you're just kind of like, why did that make me upset? Like there's nothing to be upset about here, but somehow
yeah,
that situation, what that person said, like set me off. And so now I just go into, meditation or just thinking about it like that,
yeah,
why happened? Like, why would that upset me? And then usually I find out something and it's something stupid from 20 years ago. And I'm like,
yeah,
oh, that's lame. I'm making
yeah.
decisions based on that one experience, which I probably misinterpreted at the time, anyways.
Hmm.
And then you're able to.
Yeah,
Then it's not an offensive thing, and then you start to be grateful for the challenges and the everything you have to go through because you're like, okay, this is a new area of growth, and
yes,
I have the privilege of experiencing it and
yes,
progressing forward.
yes,
So
yes,
I,
yes,
I think what you're doing is amazing. I think the even if you don't have like the set like this is what it is, I think that's good too because it just means that you get to discover it as you're going, and
yeah,
maybe you'll meet somebody and they'll be like, oh, here's exactly what you need to do, and you'll be like, so
yeah,
I've
yeah,
actually started being well, and since now I'm more comfortable in myself, I've now started to do this with other people where I'm like, you know what, you talk about this a lot and you're trying to figure out what to do, but you're telling everybody all the time, you're just not accepting it. Just do
yeah.
that thing. Stop being, I mean, be brave,
True.
stop being a
Yeah,
wuss. And that's where the
yeah,
masculine side comes in, where it's like,
yeah,
come on, come on, man,
yeah, yeah,
you could lift
yeah,
that. I know you
yeah,
could lift that. You've done
yeah,
this 1,000 times. This is
yeah,
slightly more. Who cares? Lift the thing. And then you're
yeah.
like, yeah, I'm being a little bitch.
Yeah, you're right. No, I mean there's truth to that, and I think men do need to be called out, and that's what I was saying. Like when you create guardrails, which is containment, which is like you confront somebody and saying like, dude, what you've been talking about starting that magazine for years. Like, are we gonna do it? Are we just gonna keep fucking talking about it?
Yeah.
And you be like, and then somebody's like, oh shit, like they're like confronted by that, and then they like don't move through that. It's like, oh man, for me, and I could like, if I'm gonna check myself at the door, I'm like, oh man, then I'm like responsible for all these bodies, these humans, and I'm like, oh fuck, like, oh,
There's a lot of
that's a lot
pressure.
of responsibility. It's like, oh dude, this is what I was put on this earth to do. It's like,
Yeah,
oh okay,
do it.
like,
Be
yeah,
thankful that that's your
yeah,
job because
absolutely,
that's incredible. And but again, you have to, unless you know yourself, unless you have the confidence, to push forward, whether it's going to fail or not,
yeah,
then you're never going to do it. And there are enablers around you all the time, and that
yeah,
will allow you to do that. They'll listen to your excuses and they'll logically, it could make sense. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you know what you're supposed to do and you're not doing it. So
Yes.
who
Yeah.
cares about any
Yeah.
other reason? So
Absolutely.
I love it. Well, I think I'm definitely going to have you back soon because we have,
Uh-huh.
we didn't talk about fatherhood and a million different things.
We got a lot of stuff to talk
That's a whole different area of lessons.
Yeah, man.
But in the meantime, where can people learn more about you?
Yeah, they can go, they can find me online on Instagram, Dr. Dave, Drdave, Cohodes, my last name, Cohodes. And then if they want to check out The Unbreakable Man, they just go to theunbreakableman.com. That's THE, and then unbreakableman.com. And yeah, just reach out anytime they want. I also have a podcast called The Unbreakable Man Podcast.
Ooh, I want to go with
And
that.
yeah, we'll check it out. And so I go through all kinds of interesting things. I speak with a lot of spiritual individuals because that's what, my area of interest. I'm like, that's so interesting. I'm much, I call it a psychonaut. I'm very interested in like consciousness and like expansion and like, what is all this? And so that has led me into understanding these concepts and bringing them back and saying like, okay, clarity, command, confrontation, let's do that together. And then things will change.
Love it. Well, I love what you're
Yeah.
doing. I think you're on the right
Thanks
path.
so much.
And yeah, we'll definitely be talking a bunch. So
I love it.
I'll have you back on soon.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to Podcast Mark. This has been another enlightening session for you. Hopefully, it was for me. So hopefully you got as much out of it as I did.